Thank you, Jason. Josh, would you like to provide some evidence?
Sure.
And demonstrate?
I don't think your mic is on, Josh.
Better? Okay, thank you. Yeah, okay. Well, Jason, thank you. I appreciate it. I'm excited too, so you got me all pumped up. I think what I want to do is kind of give a little bit of a framework for where the idea of the Messiah comes from, because that's kind of what we're talking about. And as we get into it, we'll kind of be able to talk about the specifics and here. It's interesting that what I imagine in a room like this, what you've got is you've got people who are all saying we want to follow God, but they're coming out with different answers about what following God means. And so we'll talk about that, and we're gonna we believe the words of Scripture. We believe the Tanakh, and so we'll talk about how they play out. So when we talk about the Messiah, I think there are three things that I see in the Bible and in Scripture that really guide us to understand the idea of the Messiah. Okay, the first is the coming from the word, right? So Messiah is this word that means anoint, to kind of pour oil upon. There are lots of messiahs in the Bible. There are even Cyrus, the king of the non-Jewish king in Persia, was called a messiah. So in some ways, Messiah can be somewhat of a, it could apply to a lot of different things, but it is the idea of the oil being poured on a person signifies God's selection on them for a particular purpose or an office. Okay, and in the Jewish world, in the Hebrew Bible, there were three primary groups of people who were anointed. There were prophets, there were priests, and there were kings. And so usually at their, coronation ceremonies, they would be anointed. It would be a symbol that not just were they selected by the people to do this job, but that God was actually selecting them to do this job. And so as time went on, throughout the history of the Jewish people, the concept of the Messiah became that sort of came together. It was a bit of a construct. And the idea of the Messiah became someone who would fulfill all three of those roles. Who would be the prophet, who would be the priest, and be the king. And when we talk about the Messiah, not just a Messiah, but the Messiah, it would be someone who would fulfill all three of those roles. Okay? That's one. I know it was three, but it's one. Second is that there is a kind of a thread that runs throughout the Hebrew Bible, a thread of redemption that starts all the way back in the beginning of the book of Genesis, when the original folks, Adam and Eve, were moved out of the garden, that there would be a person who would come to restore that garden-like relationship between God and man. And what is that garden-like relationship? It's the relationship where God and man walk with each other, they see each other, men and women are together before each other and before God with no shame. Total, complete relationship. And that is the idea that the Messiah would bring about. And then the third concept really comes out of hope, that the Messiah would come to deliver his people. Going back to the story of Hanukkah, we just celebrated Purim, the holidays and the experience of the Jewish people under persecution, under suffering, that not only would the Jewish people be freed from that persecution and suffering, but that God would redeem the world, would bring about peace, just to release all of the pain and suffering that exists in the world. And so, when I say Messiah, when I think about Messiah, I think all three of those things. And so, I know I didn't quite give a reason for why Jesus is that, but that at least gives a framework for when I talk about the Messiah, I'm talking about all of that together.
Okay, that's my 5 minutes. Yes, thank you. Jason, would you like to respond to that?
Yes. So, few things. I'm going to be quoting verses. I just want you guys to know that in some Christian Bibles, it might be a verse before or a verse after. So I just wanted to point that out, okay? So I know Josh was speaking about the concept of the Messiah and three things. What I want to talk about is my rock, my foundation. And my rock, my foundation, is the Torah, the Jewish scriptures. What does God have to say about the Messiah? See, God says in Isaiah chapter 2, verse 4, Isaiah chapter 11, verse 6, that there will be world peace. Now, I want you to think about this for a moment. You turn on your TV, go on Google on your phone, and see today if there is world peace. Right now, our country, Israel, is constantly under threat. Syria is having their own problems. France, the Jews are having a lot of problems there. And you really can tell that today, there isn't any world peace. God tells me in Isaiah chapter 11, verse 9, Jeremiah 31:33, Zechariah 14:9, and the reason I'm quoting every prophet is because I want you all to see a consistency between what they all have to say. See, God tells me that there will be a universal knowledge of one God when the Messiah comes. Fortunately, if you look today, I believe in the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Josh believes in Jesus. There are Buddhists who believe in Buddha. And other faiths and other religions, we do not have a universal knowledge of one God right now. God says in Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 2, and please, I want you guys to pull up these verses so you can look at what God has to say. Because, again, it doesn't matter what I say, it doesn't matter what Josh says, what concepts there are. God makes it very clear what the Messiah is going to do and what's going to happen. God says in Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 2, Isaiah chapter 26, verse 19, Ezekiel chapter 37, verse 12, that the dead is going to resurrect from the ground. Now, a month before I got married, I went to go to a Jewish cemetery to visit both of my grandparents that are deceased. And I promise you, when I was walking through the cemetery, I did not see any dead resurrecting from the ground. And when I got to my grandfather, I was hoping to see him resurrect, but he did not resurrect from the ground. The fact that we're all standing here today, Jews, if you're Jewish and you're standing in Los Angeles, means that the Messiah has not come, because God says in Isaiah chapter 11, verse 12, many times in, where else? In the book of Ezekiel chapter 37, verse 21, in Jeremiah chapter 23, verse 7 and 8, Jeremiah chapter 16, verse 15, which is my favorite verse, by the way. I'm going to tell you about that later. That when the Messiah comes, you'll know because all the Jews will be in Israel. Jeremiah chapter 16, verse 15 clearly states, God says, behold, days are coming. This is my favorite verse in the whole Tanakh, 23,000 verses, my favorite verse. Days are coming where no one I will not be known as the God of Israel who took my chosen ones, my servants, out of the land of Egypt from the house of slavery, but I will be known as the God of Israel, the God who took my chosen ones, who exiled them to the four corners of the earth, gathered them back and put them back in their homeland. ask yourselves, do we refer to God today as that? We don't. But God says in my Tanakh that when the Messiah comes, that's what he's going to be known as. And the last thing I just want to add is, you know that the Messiah is here when there's a temple standing in Israel. Ezekiel chapter 37 verse 26 clearly says that. If you read Ezekiel chapter 40 through 48, describes very clearly that there will be a temple standing in Israel. Right now, you see the Dome of Rock. You don't see our temple. We know that the Messiah has not came because of that. And to just end off, in Isaiah chapter 11, verse 3, and this is in clear writing, it says that the Messiah will fear God. If Jesus is the Messiah and Jesus is God, how does God fear God? Does that make sense to anybody here? It says that the Messiah will fear God. So I just wanted to end off with that and go ahead and pass it off to Josh.
Would you like to respond to that, Josh?
Sure. Sure. Okay. So maybe what we can do is actually open up and look at a couple of these passages and kind of take a look at them together. Yeah. So I'm happy to start with one. And since you talked about Isaiah 11, do you want to talk about that?
Yes, let's do it.
All right. So if you have a Bible or a Tanakh or you have your phone or whatever it is you've got, open it up. Okay. So I brought a kippah. Would you like me to wear one?
If it makes you happy.
I don't know if it makes me happy, but if it would make you feel, we're going to talk about the Bible. Does it make you feel more comfortable?
Yeah, I
okay.
Would love to stick to the Bible. That's what I love. My rock, my foundation.
Well, okay. Okay. So, okay. So, in Isaiah chapter 11, and I'm going to read this in English. I will, truth be told, my Hebrew is not that great. If I had to read this in Hebrew, we would be here for the entire night. So, okay. So it says, "There shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, and a branch from his roots shall bear fruit." Okay. So this shoot from the stump of Jesse and a branch from his roots, right? So this is talking about, it's poetry, right? So we're not talking about, gardening, okay? So this is talking about a descendant of the line of David. That's who this is talking about, yeah? Okay. So, and the Spirit of the Lord will rest on him, the Spirit of understanding, the Spirit of wisdom, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge, and the fear of the Lord. His delight shall be in the fear of the Lord. He will not judge by what his eyes see, nor decide with disputes by what his ears hear, but with righteousness he will judge the poor, decide with equity for the meek of the earth. She will strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and the breath of the lips he shall kill the wicked. Righteousness shall be the belt of his waist, and faithfulness the belt of his loins. The wolf will lay down with the lamb, the leopard lay down with the goat, right? These kind of famous passages. The nursing child shall play over the hole of the cobra, and all of this. And in the verse 9, "And they shall not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea." Great messianic passage, I would say, about the Messiah, yeah? Yes. Okay, what do we learn from the passage? We learn that the Messiah is a descendant of David, King David. There was a promise in the Bible that God would create a dynasty that comes from the direct lineage of David, and that through that dynasty, this work of redemption of the world would come. Yeah? Yes. Okay. So we agree. So, I think, so if Isaiah 11 was the only passage in the Tanakh there's really no reason to believe that this is about Jesus. Although there's really not much reason to believe that this is this is a one kind of vague overview. It's more about David and the descendant of David and the Davidic connection between David and this person than it is really. All of these other things are kind of described as the environment. What's that? 6:6. Okay. So, like, for example, they're in the Reform community, in the Reform Judaism, they see the Messiah as a messianic age. So they kind of say, well, it's not really a person, but it's a messianic age. The purpose of this passage is to show us that it is David who is the one who, through David and through his dynasty, the Messiah will come. That's the primary purpose for this verse.
Thank you, Josh. Jason, what are your thoughts?
Okay, so Josh mentioned the genealogy from David. And yes, I agree with you. It should be from King David. You see, Genesis chapter 49, verse 10 states that it is from the tribe of Judah. Numbers chapter 1, verse 18 states that it is from the father's side. See, the thing is, according to Christian theology, from what I know, book of Matthew, chapter 1, verse 23, says that Jesus came from a virgin birth. So therefore, we don't know who his father is. And I'm sure Josh has probably heard this before. And in order for the genealogy to work, it needs to make sense. I want to just follow through on a few things with the genealogy, and hopefully you could respond. Matthew chapter 1, verses 10 and 11 has a genealogy there with the name of Jeconiah. If you look in Jeremiah chapter 22, verses 28, 29, and 30, you'll see that the line of Jeconiah is cursed. Hashem tells him that you will not have any kingship from you. But for some strange reason, Matthew has that name there. The next is, when I was learning and I was examining Matthew and the book of Chronicles, chapter 1, verse 3, 11, the book of Chronicles, chapter 1, verse 3, chapter 3, verses 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. You want to pull it up real quick?
Okay. Which verse?
Book of Chronicles, first book, yeah.
First?
Yes, chapter 3, verses 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16.
Sorry, it's coming.
And I don't know if you want to get your New Testament out too, you guys, if you want to pull it up with the book of Matthew and just come.
I got it.
Yeah.
What do you want me to read?
Okay, so there are three names there: Ahaziah, Jehosh, and Amaziah. And another name, a few names after, Jehoiakim.
Yeah.
If you look at the genealogy of Matthew, those names are not even there. So we're missing a few names in the genealogy. So the first thing is, again, Numbers chapter 1, verse 18 says it has to be from the father's side. We have a guy by the name of Jeconiah who's in the genealogy, who we know his line is cursed from Jeremiah chapter 22, verses 28, 29, 30. And we're also missing three names in the genealogy when Matthew's trying to prove that Jesus is the Messiah. So my question to you is, with all these up in the air, how can we know that Jesus is really the Messiah?
Good response? Sure.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Good question. And so, nice job bringing up, I think, the names. And so, let me just kind of give, for some of you, the New Testament is a familiar book. For some of you, it's not. So, in the New Testament, the way it's organized is the first 4 books are called the Gospels. That just means there's stories of Jesus' life. They're told from 4 different people's vantage point. okay? 3 people that lived right around the time of, they all lived at the time of Jesus, but 3 people wrote very chronological, then 1 person wrote many years later. It's much more theological and theme-oriented, okay? And in the New Testament, there's 2 books that give genealogies. In Matthew, chapter 1, and in Luke, chapter 3. Luke, by the way, was the only writer of the New Testament that wasn't Jewish. All the other writers of the New Testament were Jewish, but Luke was a doctor. So he had a lot of Jewish friends, and they made a few phone calls, and they got him in. So that's the way it works. So, okay. So in those 2 genealogies, what we have is we have the genealogy in Matthew, the genealogy in Luke. Now, let me just kind of go to one thing that you had said, is because you pointed to Numbers chapter 1, verse 18 as kind of the basis for how we know that genealogies are tracked through the man, okay? And here's kind of what it says, and I'll just read Numbers 1, 17, 18, and 19, because that's the couple of verses. It says, Moses and Aaron took these men who had been named, and on the first day of the 7th month, they assembled the whole congregation together, and it points out they took men, who registered themselves by clans, by fathers' houses, according to the number of names from 20 years old upward, head by head. The Lord commanded Moses, so he listed them in the wilderness of Sinai. Okay, so this is an example of Moses counting and organizing the people of Israel and organizing them by their male connections. And that's generally how it's done in the Bible, but this doesn't necessarily give us a command that says this is the only way it's done. So this is an example, and a legitimate one, and certainly the normal one, but I don't think that this is a prescriptive verse that says, therefore, the only way you can count lineage, or you can count families, is through the male relatives, okay? Now, with that said, let me, I think I'm going to need another 5 minutes for this one.
Go ahead.
Okay, so let me just go to the Matthew passage really quick. If somebody's looking up, I had some Bibles there. Does anybody have that black Bible that was on the table? What page is it on?
Matthew what?
What page is it on?
Matthew 1.
Matthew 1.
Yeah.
It's on page
1027, 807. It's in there somewhere. You'll find it. Okay. So depending on you'll if you don't know it, just listen. Okay. So Matthew's genealogy is a really strange, unusual one. Okay. Now remember, this is written by somebody that's trying to create a claim that Jesus is the Messiah. Okay. So first of all, it starts the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the Messiah. Christ wasn't his last name. Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac. Isaac was the father of Jacob. And it goes on. Jacob was the father of Judah, of his brothers. Judah is the father of Perez, Zerah by Tamar. Interesting, a woman mentioned. Perez, the father of Hezron. Hezron, the father of Ram. It goes down. Boaz is mentioned. Rahab, the prostitute, is mentioned. Ruth is mentioned. Jesse, the father of the king of David. David was the father of Solomon, and he goes on, and he ends this particular section with talking about the Jehoiakim, who you just mentioned, or Jeconiah, right? Okay. So, who was the cursed? If you look at the passage that he quoted, God cursed Jeconiah for trying to wrongly take over David's throne. He didn't have the right to do that, and God cursed him for that. And so God said, through you, the Messiah's line won't go anymore. Okay? But yet, Matthew puts it in here. Really unusual, okay? So, and after that, they go to Babylon, and they come back, and eventually he goes down, and Jacob is the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, through whom Jesus was born, who is called the Messiah. This is the worst genealogy. If you're looking to try and create an argument for Jesus being the Messiah, this is the worst genealogy you could possibly put together. Because it's not a genealogy of Jesus. This genealogy is there to show you and to show me clearly that this is not his line. It lists women, it lists non-Jews, it lists Jeconiah, it goes all over the place. What this genealogy is showing us is the next thing that happens in the book of Matthew, which is Jesus was born of a virgin. And the sign, going back to Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14. So the genealogy in Matthew was put there to show you and to show me that there's something really unusual going on, and that this is not the genealogy of him, because it's Joseph's genealogy, who was, as you said, not his father. So he has no ethnic, no blood connection to Joseph. Now in Luke, you have a much more traditional genealogy that flows through all of the normal ways in which genealogies are counted throughout the Hebrew Bible, and all of the people are there. It doesn't go through Jeconiah, and it ends up with Mary, a woman, his mother. And Luke makes the argument that his connection to David as king goes through his mother. And this is an unusual account, without a doubt, although there's a lot of things about Jesus that are unusual. This is just the tip of the iceberg.
Thank you.